Welcome to day 3. My name is Gary Davis, still. With the Media and Entertainment Group, I'm a technical specialist. I've been with the company for about 8 years, but going back prior to that, I was a customer of 3ds Max, going back to the DOS days, so it's been my bread and butter for, sad to say, or proud to say, over half my life. I'm really glad and proud to be here talking about the 2016 release. It's a fantastic release, and there's a lot of stuff for a lot of different people. The first thing I want to point out about the release is that we've eliminated a little bit of confusion around this. Historically, and in the past several years, there's been 2 flavors of 3ds Max. There was 3ds Max and 3ds Max Design. And between the 2 of those applications, they were in almost every single product design or product suite that we have at the company. And this means that it was for architects, it was for engineers, it was for game developers, it was for people doing broadcast and visual effects. But there was a lot of confusion around which one do I buy. So a lot of people were saying, you know, if there's 2 flavors, you know, which one's the better one? Which one's right for me? And so what we've done with this release is we've eliminated that confusion. We've rolled it back to a single version of 3ds Max, so there's no more confusion. It's one release. It has all the features of both versions. There's no more which version to get or anything. So that's going to make my life a heck of a lot easier in my role. But I hope it eliminates the confusion for those of you out there in the world wondering which one to use. So it's a single version of 3ds Max, and it's going to be useful in all of these different industries. And 3ds Max, as you can see by the graphic that I've created here, is really a hub for a lot of these different industries. Now at NAB, we're focused obviously around television and film, but at Autodesk, we are in a lot of different industries. And I would ask yourself to say, ask yourself, I might be a broadcaster, but how many times have I taken on a job just to, kind of pay the bills or whatever to do that might be something outside of my comfort zone or outside of my norm? So if you're doing television and film, for example, you might dip into advertising, or you might be looking at doing something with casual or mobile gaming for an interactive experience. All the way on around the wheel, we've got manufacturing, simulation, and reality capture, and there's just a wealth of different fields. And the point is that these lines are blurring. These tool sets are being used that are common between all these different fields are common inside of 3ds Max. So with the 2016 release, one of the things that I'm really happy about to talk to people about is that we have things for new users, or what I call new and part-time users, people that don't need to be or ever want to be a guru Yoda level person doing 60, 80 hours a week in this product. They might just want to bring a model in and render an animation real quick. They don't need to become some Lord of the Rings person to do that. The other thing is that we do have people using it at the extreme high level. These are seasoned users that have been using it for a long time. So we have tools in the 2016 release for them as well. So both new and part-time users and seasoned veterans that are using it, and in all these different industries. So it's really something for everybody. And that's why I like to say that this release has, in fact, something for everybody. So 2016, it does have a lot of highlights. This next slide is intentional PowerPoint hell. I'm intentionally bombarding you with a lot of text right here. I'm not going to read you every one of these, and I don't have time to show you every one of these, but my point was, and for those of you watching on the recording on the internet, you can kind of pause this and maybe Google these terms if you want to find out more about this later. But there's a lot of stuff for a lot of different industries and for a lot of different skill levels. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is talk over a video, and I'm going to play this down. This was customer content that we've been provided to use for our demonstrations. This is from a video game cinematic called The Crew. It's from a company, Ubisoft. But I want to point out a couple of things here. We're seeing automotive information. This is actual CAD data coming from the automotive manufacturer. And this is all video to promote a video game, right? So this is rendered animation using automotive data and visual effects particle systems for promotion of a video game on television. So all these different industries are kind of blurring together, and that's kind of re-emphasizing my point. Here we're moving into very clearly a lot of particle systems and visual effects. By the way, what you're looking at is a completely 100% computer-generated piece. There's no video footage in this piece at all. So now we're moving into the world of architecture in downtown Manhattan. We'll be taking a look at that shot here in a little bit. But we've got photorealistic rendering of automobiles, of architecture. We've got character animation, sort of background character animation. Very cinematic cuts, a lot of these cameras that are moving back and forth. So we're talking about the world of cinematography. Again, blurring the lines. Is this games? Well, yeah. Is it rendered animation? Yes. Is it visual effects? Yes. It's kind of all these things, architecture, automotive. And I keep saying this blurring of the lines. That's kind of the idea with all these different industries kind of not coming together, but the tool sets that are needed to do work in these different industries. really dynamic animation. Now we're entering into motion graphics, and as we pull out here, this becomes the actual final pullout for the promotion of what is called The Crew. This is a video game that's available now. I encourage you to go check out The Crew if you're into driving games. It's certainly a very popular one that's out there now. And before I move on, I'd like to thank Ubisoft and Ivory Tower. These are the producers of the actual video game itself. And Unit Image was the company out of France that actually made the piece that you just saw, or this was excerpts of it. And there's a lot more of it available online. On a personal note, if Alex Horst is watching, he's a colleague of mine out of Germany. He was very influential and very helpful putting this piece together. And I would just like to thank Alex on the record for that. The first project that I'm going to get into is a common workflow, and this is one aimed at sort of that new user and part-time user. I want to do something very quick, I want to do something very easy, and it's a very common task where you might have an animation of something on a turntable. So this would be something that a lot of people might want to do. If maybe you're in a game studio and you're doing a character and you just want to do a turntable animation to show a producer what this thing is going to look like or something like that. So turntable animations are a very common thing that you might want to do. And the point is you want these to be very easy and you want people to be able to do these very quickly. So as I jump over into 3ds Max 2016, what you're faced with when you launch 3ds Max is this startup screen. Now, the startup screen isn't new, but what we've added is this ability to use templates. Now, these 5 templates right here actually ship with the product, but what I've done is actually used what's called the template manager to customize and create my own, and it's called the engine block turntable template. If I go and say, I want to create a new scene from this template, what it's going to do is actually load up 3ds Max with all of my settings that I want specifically for this turntable. So as a technical director, I might set up this template and say, use this template for all of our turntable animations, and I know they'll be consistently the same for every artist. So it's a real quick way to get started. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean something just for new users. That could be somebody at any level just saying, we need consistency across our projects, and we want to do that. What I've done, I'll give you a sort of a tour of what we've got here. The things that I've added to the default is this sort of dummy object, helper object here, and you can see that obviously that's our turntable sort of spinning animation that's kind of sitting and waiting. We've also set up this specific template with what's called the physical camera. If I select the camera in this scene, this is new to 2016, and this was co-developed with a company called the Chaos Group. If you've ever heard of the V-Ray rendering engine, that's the company that makes the V-Ray, and we worked with them in tandem. V-Ray has a physical camera, and this is not unlike that, but what's nice about this one is it's not specific to any specific rendering engine. So this is not a plugin, this is native part of 2016, and it's a really nice real-world camera. You have things like ISO, f-stops, and shutter speed, and things that would be appropriate to a real-world camera. Another thing that we did in this scene is we said, let's make it easy for the new and part-time user to come in here and collect these parameters. And what we created here was a bit of a light board. And you can see here, I can just roll this slider back and forth, and we can control the lighting in our scene. Or I could say maybe that light that I was just moving around, maybe I want to change the filter color of that and make it sort of this crazy disco funky red or whatever. Well, I'll undo that because I don't want crazy disco funky red at this moment. We can also change the exposure value of everything in this scene. And this is using real-world photometric lighting and materials in this scene. And I'll talk about materials here in a second. But you can see that this is a really simple way to give people fast access to these tools. The next thing I'm going to show you is this ribbon up here. And this template that I'm using is using another feature in tandem with it called the Design Workspace. And this is a series of tabs up here. And all of these tools, it looks like a lot of tools, and it is. But these are what we call workflow-based tabs. And these aren't new tools. Nothing that I just showed you there are new tools, but what it is a consolidation of existing tools into workflows that people just need to do very commonly. It's like import files, putting materials on an object, and then ultimately rendering it out. So it's a consolidation of workflows, very simple. And I can say, let's go ahead and import a file, and I could go get this STP file. STP file is a CAD format. It's a very engineering kind of format. It's not anything to do with visual effects or games or anything like that. And as I bring up the import dialog in 3ds Max here, you can see that the list is quite long. That's not a gee whiz like super particle blow up cool feature, but the ability to work with all these different file formats is extremely important. So you can get data from everywhere and anywhere and bring it into 3ds Max. We call that aggregation of data, bringing it in from all these different places. So if I import this model, what I'm going to do here is actually bring in the raw STP data. Again, this is CAD engineering data that the person that made this data might not have ever expected it to be animated in some kind of photorealistic way. It's actual data to generate the engine for manufacturing. And we're going to bring it into 3ds Max, but you can see here it comes in really, really clean, and it's a lot of geometry. But the raw STP data doesn't really come in with any materials. It's not photorealistic. And then what we're going to do is very easily take that into 3ds Max. That's kind of what we're bringing it in for, is to either go to the world of photorealism, or with the same rendering engine, in this case Metal Ray, we could do a non-photorealistic look for something like a technical illustration or something like that. So again, a lot of different options. So, whoops, I'll get over that scene in a moment here. So as the scene comes in here, the only little bit of cooking show that I did ahead of time was I grouped this engine as it comes in, and I made it a child of this dummy object. So we've got our animation already set up for you. But if I render this out, you can see that it's obviously not photorealistic at this point in the viewport. And if I go ahead and hit render, it's loading this onto the GPU using a rendering engine called iRay. And this is included in 3ds Max for a number of years. We continue to develop iRay and Metal Ray as far as the two primary rendering engines, but there's others included. But you can see iRay is a really fast renderer, and it's doing this progressive refinement on the GPU of the workstation, but it doesn't have that photorealistic look. So that's the point, is we want to get to this nice realistic render very quickly. So what I can do is I come through this object, and you can see there's actually hundreds of objects in here. I'll show a little feature that's been added, is this thing we call pre-selection highlighting. And I'm not clicking on, you can't really see my hand here, but I'm not clicking on the mouse or the cursor. I'm actually just rolling over these objects, and it's showing me what I'm about to select. And in the case of having hundreds of objects like this, it's really easy for me to say, what am I about to work on? So to start assigning materials to this, I'm going to say, let's bring up our material editor, and I want to work with a material library. In this case, I made a material library in demo guy fashion here. I've got the 6 materials that I'm going to need for this specific scene. But these 6 materials that I'm coming and grabbing out of the material browser here are based on ones that are out of something called the Autodesk Material Library. And as I put those over there, I'm about to dismiss this, but you can see as I scroll down, the Autodesk Material Library that I've highlighted has dozens and dozens of categories, and there's over 1,200 shaders that are included with 3ds Max. And these are based on, this is a real fancy term here, they're physically photometrically accurate, and that means that they're based on the real world. That means you don't have to worry about anything. If I want something to look like metal, copper, or chrome, or steel, or fabric, or water, or whatever, you just drag and drop it. And we've got engineers that have physically tested this to make sure that the refraction of light through glass is accurate and all that. So you don't have to worry about it. It's not just something that looks like metal. It has the physical characteristics of metal. So it's not just like, oh, that looks cool. I mean, looking cool is important, or looking real is important, but these are physically based in the real world. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. Now, to apply these, I'm going to very quickly just come through and say, actually, I'll be a little bit of a slob here. Let's just take everything in this engine, and I'm going to make it a brushed metal. So right now, everything is almost like a chrome. But that's going to be a good starting point for me to then say, maybe this back side of the engine, I want to be this sort of dull paint. And then these 4 these pipes, and maybe these top things. I'm not an engine car guy, so I don't know the names of these things. Forgive me. Those things need to be chrome. They look cool chrome, so let's make them chrome. Now, moving around here to the front, I could say very easily, and again, using that pre-selection highlighting, I can really easily see what I'm doing and say these 3 objects need to be sort of that dark rubber. Now I'm going to come in through and get the main engine block. And I'll get these other receivers. Again, I don't know the names of these things, but I know that from other people telling me, these need to be Ford blue. That looks great. And then the last thing I'm going to do here is come around to the front. And again, once again, very easily, I can see what I'm about to select using this pre-selection highlighting. And I just want to get those 8 cables. And let's go ahead and make those red. So now I've applied 6 materials to this object in a matter of minutes, did it live. And if I go ahead and render that out, now you're going to see that once again, iRay is loading that onto the GPU. It's processing all of those shaders onto the GPU, and now it's doing a hardware render of that, and we get that nice photorealistic image in a matter of seconds. So really fine detail on that model. Again, using CAD data, bringing it in. One thing I'll do here, cancel that out. I'm just going to jump into a player that we have here. This is RV, which is a new offering from Autodesk. And I'm just going to play through a couple of versions of these that I rendered out. So there's the engine itself. I'll stop on this one, actually, and point out one new feature that I don't really have time to show you in the interface. But this is a GPU-based ambient occlusion from Metal Ray. That's a whole lot of buzzwords, and it's a lot of nerd talk. But for the compositors out there, Ambient occlusion is something that obviously has been around for a little while. It's what I call the nook and cranny shader. It's where there's an absence of light, it kind of makes a little bit of a shadow. But the nice news in 2016 is that this is being calculated optionally if you have a nice GPU on the hardware. So it's hardware accelerated at render time. Now, as I continue to play this down in RV, our new player, we can see that I also rendered out this non-photorealistic look. Again, technical illustration. And here's just another version that I rendered out. I call this the Kiss engine. It kind of reminds me of the band Kiss for some reason. But anyway, talking about versioning, we've got all these different versions that are playing out. Versioning is going to be something that's really important, and we've got versioning inside of Shotgun. Now, I don't have time to do a full Shotgun demo with 3ds Max, but I just wanted to have a slide in here to talk a little bit about Shotgun and the importance of it in an entire pipeline. 3ds Max works with Shotgun. You can actually launch 3ds Max from Shotgun in what we call the launcher. The way that Shotgun and 3ds Max interop and talk to each other is through Python, and 3ds Max added Python scripting, I think, and it was the previous release, if not one back. It's been around for a while, and that's good news. And you can also access it from within 3ds Max. So this is for artists and teams working together, managers, producers. Again, I'm not going to turn this into a full-blown Shotgun demo because there's a lot of them happening, but I encourage you to stick around for one of the Shotgun demos. Anything you see Shotgun working with in the other demos, it also works with 3ds Max. So just worth mentioning there. But now back to the action and into our scene here. I'll jump away a little bit from this engine model itself, and I'm going to just focus in a little bit on modeling. If I unhide this car and just select it, and let's focus in and just sort of isolate this car here. I'll show a couple of different features that have been added in modeling. Now, on the hood of this car, we have a modifier, a couple of modifiers. One is called the crease set modifier, and one is the open subdivision modifier. If I turn off our overlay here, or sorry, turn that off. As I toggle this on and off, you can see, I'll keep your attention, let me get in on there a little bit more. If you keep your attention on the hood and maybe these curves right here, as I turn this on and off, you can see that the shape of that hood is changing. And that's the reason for that is this open subdivision. What the open subdivision modifier does is it changes the topology or the curvature of it based on creases. And if I turn that off and go down to our crease sets, what you can see here is I have the new option to say I want to see these in the viewport. So I can actually see these creases and actually know where those values are going to be to control the curvature of something without adding new geometry to define that curve. So that's kind of a new way of working. And another nice feature of this open subdiv modifier is that we can do this. Once again, you keep hearing me say things about the GPU. This is actually a way to offload tasks onto the video card. And if I overlay this, you can see that we have a GPU display. So this now, the hood of this car is inside of the video card and not being calculated by the CPU of this computer. So once again, if I select that, one nice other new option in the GPU mode is that I can turn on what's called adaptive subdivision. And this will take a second, but what I can also do is turn off this ISO line display, and now it's going to look a little bit jaggy. But the point here, I shouldn't say jaggy, but the point here is that as I zoom in and out, watch the polygons actually sort of split and divide. You can see that it's creating new geometry based on how close I am to it. And I can increase that number of iterations so that it's going to really refine this model depending on, it's going to make more geometry based on how close I get. Well, normally you wouldn't need to see that as an artist. I can just turn on this thing called ISO line display, and I don't really have to see that happening under the hood. That was a pun intended. That's terrible. But you can see it happening on top of and under the hood, but you don't really have to. You can just work and see that natively. Moving along here, I'm going to talk about one other tool that's a segue into my next demonstration. There's a tool we have here that's new called the Mesh Chooser Transformer. That's a heck of a name. What we've got here with the Mesh Chooser Transformer is just a single slider. And as you look here, while I just rock this slider back and forth, all that's happening is it's choosing between different sets of car tires. Well, that's kind of an interesting tool. It's actually not a new tool that we introduced in 2016, but it's a new tool that we built with a new tool that comes with 2016. And let me elaborate on what I mean by that. So what we have is as probably the biggest new tool, and it's getting a lot of attention already, 3 days in, and it's getting a huge exposure on the internet, is what we call the Max Creation Graph, or MCG. This is a visual programming language, and just before I move on, I'm an artist. I come from an art background. I went to art school, like painting and photography and all that. I'm not a programmer. Obviously, I'm a pretty big geek, so I'm a little bit technical, but I'm not a programmer. I'm not a scripter. But what MCG is a visual node-based programming language, and it allows somebody like me, an artist, to work with somebody who's extremely technical to sort of author these tools. And I shouldn't even say extremely technical. It's a tool that doesn't require programming, and I'll by example, kind of show you some of the abilities of this tool. Jumping into this scene, this is our beach scene from the crew that we saw from Unit Image. Once again, we'd like to thank them. And so, as you can see, I've got this really massive scene. There's a lot of geometry in this scene, a lot of instancing of things around, and it would probably take a little while to put this together. That video, by the way, was put together. I think it was a team of 15 people, if I'm not mistaken, and they worked. It was 2-man months of 15 people. So that huge, all the cars racing and stuff going crazy was put together really quickly, and that's one of the things that we see that's nice in environments with 3ds Max is really small teams doing fast turnaround. That's something we're very, very proud of. So anyway, in this environment, to talk a little bit about this MCG, I'm going to sort of isolate down onto this roller coaster, and let me jump into a different view here. So here's our roller coaster that we needed for our background of the Santa Monica Pier. And we were talking to our developers about this MCG tool, and we were saying, you know, we might need a tool that actually authors a roller coaster. So this is the Max Creation Graph, and I don't have anything loaded up in it. But if I said I want to open up a couple of tools here, let's maybe look at a clone modifier. Now, a clone modifier was one. Whoops, let me go back up one here. A clone modifier was something that was one of the top user voice requests. And as I open this up, you can see this is what we call the Max Creation Graph. This is a node-based workflow. And again, if this is intimidating to you, it's OK. What we've got is somebody put this together, one of our developers. But even as me, the artist, I can say, OK, well, this thing does position, rotation, scale. And it's been notated by the author. It puts all those three together, and then ultimately combines these results into what's called a modifier. And if you're using 3ds Max, you certainly know what a modifier is. Well, let's take a look at what this looks like. You know, so as an artist, I might say, well, that might be a little bit intimidating to me, or you know, whatever. But maybe I just want to use the output of that result. So this object right here is an editable mesh with this clone modifier applied. So again, to just reiterate, the clone modifier is built by the Max Creation Graph. The clone modifier was something that a lot of people wanted. And we could have just written the clone modifier and said, here you go, it's a new feature, and I would be up here demoing it with a smile. But instead, we're saying, here it is. Oh, by the way, it was built with this whole new environment to build as many new tools as you want. Now, as I look and rock this number of clones up and down, you can see those pillars, or sorry, those lights on the pier are actually, you know, disappearing off into the distance. I can change the offset of these, so how far apart they are. And I can also introduce things like rotation and scale to do crazy motion graphics types things. In this case, I'm just using it to replicate a model down the way. And that's just one example, the clone modifier. Moving on to this roller coaster, what we were talking and kind of speculating, how would you build a roller coaster with a couple of tools? Well, we know that we're going to need this spline, but if I take this single spline that was created, you know, just drawing out lines, much in the same way you would in Adobe Illustrator, you can see here that this roller coaster is actually a procedural process, and that means that it's non-destructive. I'll point out that the roller coaster, the tracks, the supports are all following along. The supports are actually growing in height, but the base red objects aren't growing in height, but they are kind of aware of the ground plane. So this gives the artist, or maybe the art director or the producer of the video, the cinematic, to say, you know, let's make that coaster look a lot more scary and do something like this. As opposed to having some piece of collapsed geometry, I can author this using this interactive tool, the Max Creation Graph, and very easily use these pieces. Now, again, as the artist, all I've been given is something called the super spline. The super spline was built using MCG, and it gives the artist the ability to say, pick a path, which is the spline, and pick an object to replicate across that spline. So in this case, I've got the ribs, and I could say, how many of these do you want? And as I rock this number up and down, you can see these are the ribs that we're calling them along the track. Well, if I look at these ribs, these are actually using just these few little pieces right over here. If I isolate in on this guy, this is the model that's being replicated across that track. And as I modify it, you can see as I do like a bend modifier on the one single one I have selected, those results are being instantiated all the way around that coaster. So it's a non-destructive parametric function, which is pretty cool. And again, as an artist, I could just say, okay, I might not understand the way that that thing was put together, but my teammate did. And now I can just, as the artist, I can come through and very easily change the cosmetic look of this. And I can just adjust things and change things much in the same way I would any other model, but it's parametric and non-destructive. Moving along, I'll show you another example that we put together. Oh, one last thing I'll show you on the coaster that's kind of cool is it's actually aware of the ground plane. If I rotate the pier, you can see that those the red supports are actually following along for the ride. So this tool is really generic and kind of functional for doing a lot more than just making roller coasters. Another one that we made here is called the wire hanger. So we had these telephone poles down here, and we thought, wouldn't it be cool to have procedural telephone poles, or the wires actually. Using a tool that was introduced in the previous release of 3ds Max, the Select and Place tool, I'm just going to grab this object, and you can see I can put this anywhere in my scene, but notice that the telephone wires are actually following along for the ride. So no matter where I put this object in my scene, the telephone wires are coming along for the ride. The way that that's done is if I just select one of those telephone wires, it's using a new primitive type that we authored with the Max Creation Graph called the wire hanger. And these are just examples that we put together. So it's got tension I can control and the resolution of that wire. Again, these are just things that we thought of to put together for this demonstration. And I brought with me to Vegas about 47 tools, exactly 47 tools. That's just the tip of the iceberg. This is an environment where you can go nuts making hundreds or thousands of your own tools. The next example I'm going to show you is a tool that we made to actually augment a system that we have in 3ds Max called Populate. If you want a demo of Populate, I'll be over at the booth and can show you a little bit more about that. But this, let me zoom in here on these hats. These hats are kind of interesting. We've got, oops, let me move this, our pier down a little bit. I messed around with it. So there we go. So these hats are something that's kind of interesting. If I turn on my Populate characters, this is what I call an autonomous pedestrian system. Again, using some big fancy words there. But Populate is a way to get your scene populated with a lot of characters that are walking around in the background. But what we did on this guy right here, you notice that he has a backpack. Populate doesn't support backpacks. So we said, wouldn't it be cool to be able to have a tool called Place on Face? And this just lets you pick any other object in my scene and place it on the guy. So right now you can see I'm rolling that backpack around. It's just saying pick a model and put it on another model, and it put it on this specific polygon. So I know that it actually happens to be polygon face number 1566 for the backpack, but I could put this on any number of objects in my scene. So it's kind of a really cool little workflow to augment tools. And this isn't specific just to Populate, but we thought about this tool like we want to put hats on people or phones in their hands or backpacks on them. And then our engineers and us, we kind of sat and whiteboarded it, and they said, well, what if we just had a tool that put any object on any other object? Let's be a little more generic about this so that we can use it for a lot of different things. And again, these are just things that we came up with. This is an open, the floodgates are open. You can go nuts with this and make anything you want here. So the point of this is that we've got a lot of different tools. You can create new modifiers. You can create new primitives. And there's a lot of different things that you can do with Max. It's unlimited. I mean, it's kind of the sky's the limit with what you can do with the Max Creation Graph. And again, one of the points that we'd like to make about this is that you can create, customize, and share these tools with other users. And talking about sharing a little bit, it brings up the topic of community. 3ds Max has the largest user community of any product in media and entertainment. It actually has a bigger community than the media entertainment group itself. I just like to point these out. These are numbers coming out of last week off of Facebook. And you can see nobody messes with AutoCAD. AutoCAD is the bread and butter. You don't mess with AutoCAD at Autodesk. But if we look at these numbers, 3ds Max has over 500,000 users on Facebook. And just to mention two other websites, we've got ScriptSpot and Max Plugins. These are not Autodesk websites, but they have over 1 million and 2 million visitors a year, respectively. These are places where you can just go and get free tools that people make and share. So this gigantic user community has now this new Max Creation Graph unleashed on them as of, well, it ships tomorrow. And so expect to see hundreds, if not thousands, and tens of thousands of tools just being shared out there. And that's kind of the idea. In this next and last example, I'm going to show you some workflow of animation performance. And I'm going to mention something called the user voice and the SURFs, or the small user feature requests. These used to be called SATs, which was small annoying things, and that was actually a term that we used at the company. But the small annoying things, or the SURFs, is a website called the user voice. Now, if you Google, or for those of you listening at home, if you want to Google 3ds Max user voice, it's a website where you can go and vote on things. And our product designers, our product managers, and our developers are really looking at this and taking this very seriously. In fact, the last feature I showed you, that Max Creation Graph, was the #1 feature request with over 700 votes. People voted. We put it in there. Everyone who voted on it gets their votes back, and now they can go vote for other things. So we very seriously listen to this user voice, and I just wanted to mention that. If you're not aware of it, please Google user voice and go tell us what you want in this product, and hopefully we get to it, with a lot of votes. I'm going to open up another file here, this last example. And I'm going to start with an intentional error here, kind of in demo guy fashion. How many times have you opened up a scene file where you're working and you're missing texture maps? Maybe somebody gave you a file. Yeah, I mean, this is like, I can't tell you how much time I've spent in the last 20 years repairing this error. Well, what we've got now, and this is a tiny little button, but man, do I love this button, is remove all. I can just click that button, and now this scene is no longer going to give me those errors. It's no longer going to give me render. If I submit this to the render farm, it won't give me any errors. So this is now, I just fixed that with one little click. And that's the things that people are requesting, these small user feature requests. Another one that I forgot to show you earlier in the rendering demo was pausing mental ray. While you're in the middle of a render, you can just hit pause. As simple as that is, that was something that people wanted for a number of years, including myself. I got my votes back, so now I can use them somewhere else. Anyway, back to the action here. Here, in this scene, we've got a car, and it was actually pre-animated by an animator, and we cached this out to disk using something called the point cache. The point cache isn't new to this release, but I wanted to bring it in and show you something that is very popular, is that the point cache gives you the ability to offload your animation so you can get better performance, and I can do what's called retiming. So again, that's not new, but what is new, if I play this back, you'll notice that in this particular scene, we've got about 250,000 polygons, and we're getting about 8 or 10 frames a second, which isn't bad, but it's not real time. Well, what I did was I exported this file using what's called the Alembic file format. So this is a different version. I just kind of cooking show unhid and hid a different version. And if I select this model, this is the Alembic file format that's new to 2016. And what's new also is this thing called performance mode. Now, I'm about to click this button, but I'll draw your attention right down here. You're going to see this progress bar go across the screen. It's going to happen pretty quick. So as this green bar goes across, what's happening is it's taking all this information and it's loading it onto the GPU. And once again, you keep hearing me talking about offloading to the GPU and rendering on the GPU. And this is a really important process. It's not mandatory, but it's a really nice option if you have that. So now we've cached this Alembic file onto the GPU, and as it plays through once, now I'm getting about 80 or 90 frames per second. So it's actually playing back too fast, which is not something that you hear very often. So this is a good problem to have. And I can just throttle that back by saying, I want Max to play this back in real time. So now as an animator, I could really focus in on the finesse and kind of fine-tune this thing. And I'm getting real-time, more than real-time performance. You can see here it's still capable of playing 70, 80, 90 frames per second, but I'm playing back at 30 because that's what I want to do. The last thing I want to do, I mentioned that retiming function. Well, here we've got our car, but I want to say, instead of playing back the original animation, instead of reanimating this or asking the animator to redo that, I can just say I want to use what's called the playback graph. And this is a playback graph that's been added onto this Alembic file format. Now, in this case, what I could do is say, on the very first frame, we're at frame 50. So I want to animate on frame 50. I want to be on frame 50. And on the last frame of frame 115, I want to be on frame 115. So that didn't really do anything, and that's kind of the point, is if I make this animation linear, now we have the exact same animation. Nothing has changed at this point. But what we might do is sort of fine-tune it and art direct this a little bit. So I might say, let's do some time warp kind of bullet time effect where the car is going to slow down right about here, and then once it's almost done skidding, it'll become back to sort of normal speed. So right about here, I might want to add a keyframe to my animation curve, and then let's just drop this down and do that. So with just one more click, now I've got a linear interpolation, and I've retimed this. And then the last step in the last part of my demonstration is just to recache that onto the GPU. Now I've got my real-time playback, and I can see that I've got that bullet time effect. So it's a really quick and easy way to get through a lot of different scenes. And once again, the point there is that you're managing really complex scenes and keeping the performance up. So that's going to do it for me. I'm going to just play down this reel and kind of highlight some of the features of the 2016 release. Check out the Area website. Check out the Facebook community. Check out our learning channel, 3ds Max learning channel on YouTube. There's a lot of great features out there, and I only showed you the tip of the iceberg. So thanks very much for your time. It looks like Daryl is next, and I would imagine that means a Maya demo. A Maya demo is coming up next. So there you go. Thanks.